Welcome to the Creative Ops Compass podcast, your navigation system for turning creative chaos into strategic impact. My name is Jesse Krinsky. I'm a creative operations consultant and the founder of InFocus Consulting. I help in-house creative teams streamline workflows, improve stakeholder relations, and elevate their role as strategic partners. Why do some DAM implementations transform how teams work, while others become expensive digital filing cabinets that nobody trusts? Well, it's less about the platform itself than about everything that happens after the purchase. Who manages it, how it's governed, whether it's designed around actual user workflows or theoretical best practices.
You can buy as many tools as you want, but if you don't learn about how to use them properly, it's never going to work the way you've seen in the demos.
Today, I'm speaking with Phil Seibel, a digital librarian with Aldis Systems. Phil has spent his career helping organizations make their digital assets actually findable and usable, not just stored somewhere in the cloud. We're going to talk about what it actually takes to make a DAM work. Governance, resourcing, the dangers of treating DAM management as a side project, and why understanding your team's user journey matters more than any feature list. If your team already has a DAM that's maybe not working as well as you'd hoped, or if you're researching platforms right now, this conversation will show you what really makes the difference. Phil, thanks so much for joining me. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today. There is a lot to discuss about the opaque and complicated and daunting topic of DAMs and DAM management, and I'm really excited to get into it with you today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Jesse. I'm excited to be here too. It's a real setup for our see how many things I can fix. Yeah, or at least help with. Yeah, this will be great. I'm excited.
So a lot of the in-house creative leaders I work with, they understand that they need a DAM or a MAM, but the role of a digital librarian or a media manager isn't as clearly defined as, say, an editor or a motion designer. So let's just start with the basics. What do you actually do as an external digital librarian?
Yeah. So my position, a lot of what I do is coming in and having conversations with those teams, the editors, the producers, lots of folks in post-production. I'll talk to them and say, okay, well, what is it you're having problems with? What is it you really like about your process? What are you willing to change, unwilling to change? A lot of it is the discussion of the user journey before you get into anything else with taxonomy or metadata, really just figuring out where those handoffs are between like the information, the media, and responsibility. And once you understand that, that helps with the whole asset management process.
So I see a pattern a lot where teams, they fight hard to get a budget approval for a DAM, and they might celebrate when they finally get it, and then 6 months later they're frustrated because it's not delivering the let's say the value they expected. So what's the difference between owning a DAM platform and actually having a really effective one?
Yeah, I would say that in a word, it's governance. But I'd say that to work on that and expand on the idea, I think that it's the element of saying, okay, well, if you own a DAM platform, right, you're buying a tool, or you're buying access to a tool, or you're building a tool, whatever it is. But the tool isn't the solution. The solution is a shift of habits and mindsets and often workload, figuring out who's going to do what. That's the real solution, is getting all those pieces in place and understanding where does responsibility get handed off, where does data get handed off, and where does the actual asset go. Those are small elements in the digital space. Those are just three quick things I frequently think of to go, okay, well, how do we take this from a tool to a solution, really? Think of it like hardware often, right? Like if you buy a hammer and some nails, it doesn't mean you know how to build a house, and you can then go, you know what I'll do? I'm going to buy a nail gun because that's going to go faster. You still haven't learned how to build a house. You just have a different way of doing this thing you're not skilled at faster. So I think about that a lot with these things where it's like, you can buy as many tools as you want, but if you don't learn about how to use them properly, it's never going to work the way you've seen in the demos.
I like your analogy to the hammer and nail. I have a similar one that I've said for a long time, which is anybody can get access to pencil and paper, but how many people can write a great novel, right? They're tools. How you use them is what actually really matters in the end. So going back to that governance central point about that being the crux, the difference between having an effective DAM and just owning the tool, where should the team start thinking about how they're going to manage the dam? Is it when they're researching the platforms? Is it after it's already in place? When should they be thinking about how to actually implement it?
Yeah, I would say, well before you're looking at platforms, honestly. Sit down and talk to your users. Talk to the people who are having trouble finding stuff, whether they're your editors or your executives. Talk to your financial people. See if there is a space to work on the budget, and if not, why, and how to move those arguments. Like, have those conversations internally well ahead of looking at platforms, because there's a lot to do in terms of saying, what works, what doesn't, and what's going to wind up on our tech wish list for bells and whistles, right? Because you got to have carrots sometimes to dangle in front of certain parties, sometimes to get them on board. And that's fine, right? Make as many people happy as possible and make the case for it. That's how you get user adoption. But it's that sitting down and having those long, detailed conversations with the teams, sometimes bringing up the stuff that hasn't worked for years and just trying to figure out how you're going to crack that nut.
Let's dive into it a little more. So, what are some questions that teams don't typically ask that they should be when they're thinking through this process about the governance side, about how they're going to actually use this dam? What should they be thinking about that may not be so obvious to them?
I think for starters, one of the things to talk about always when it comes to discussing efficiency with media and metadata is at every step when you're saying, okay, well, this is what we're doing now, you've got to stop and say, why are we doing it that way? Often it is a very simple, because it's super efficient. We drag it from here to here. Sometimes it's like you get three people in the room, especially when you're working with folks who are in a really fast-paced space. Like in a post-production space, if you have people who are in an advertising agency and they're just pumping out as many things as they can because they've got a busy schedule, they bang it out, they get their deliverable, they're on to the next one. If that's their process, they might be doing stuff just to get things done. You have no idea, and it's no fault of anyone's. It's just when the pace is so frenetic, you have to sit down sometimes and say, okay, are we busy and frenetic because we have so much work and we're really, chugging away at our best and we're spending all our energy doing our best work? Or are we busy and frenetic because we're doing some stuff wrong and we have to make up ground all the time? Just because something works doesn't mean it's the best way to go about it. And sometimes it's difficult to get people to give up their habits, to give up their darlings about the way they like to do things. But often if you can show them that overall you're going to reduce stress in the workspace and you're going to make the things that they're doing easier for them, if you can really show that to someone who is in a space where they feel like they don't have time for asset management conversations, then they get on board. Because they go, okay, I get it. I'm not the person who's doing all the copy cataloging or the original cataloging. I'm the person who needs to understand what the shape of this is so I can step into my role,
So jumping off from that, when teams do accept that they need a dedicated management for the dam itself, next question, of course, is about the resourcing. Should they hire internally? Should they use fractional support, or should they outsource it completely? I know you work with teams sort of across the spectrum there. So what factors determine which approach makes sense?
Yeah, I think it varies from team to team. And I'll say the biggest team factor that varies that I find is how much willingness and how much time people have within their own roles to be custodians of metadata. That's really all it is. If the editors and the producers are okay with entering information as they go because the pace of their job makes it so they can do that, right? I get that, I talk a lot about video in this because this is the one where video I feel like is the beast that makes a lot of problems in asset management. So if you have teams that are cool with being the folks who are saying, hey, I'm going to at least send an email to let people know that this is, this creator, this videographer, this person, or, it's this type of a file, it's got this kind of a rights management issue. Here's the agency release. Here's the talent release for whatever you're putting out there. If you have people who are cool with doing that work, then it's very easy. But frequently you wind up with people who are saying, well, listen, I don't have time to enter metadata. I don't have time to run an archive. I need to make sure that I have my stuff to get my job done because they already have a job. It's one of those things where it's like, if you already have a job where you're slammed 40 hours a week, then you're not going to gain a lot of efficiency by then also telling that person that they have to be the librarian. So sometimes it's somebody coming in and being, that part of the governance council, right? A librarian who comes in and says, all right, I'm going to check with each person on the team because my headspace is in the library, the realm of looking at this from a 10,000 foot view. and then we'll discuss what needs to be done to move forward with any other projects. Sometimes it's having fractional support of the people just doing the tagging. And it's a matter of occasionally, having them call an editor or a producer and say, hey, how are we doing with this? Are people finding what they need? Creating quarterly check-ins, figuring out, how to continue to deliver, and having somebody who's cognizant of that, mindful of the process, paying attention, making those changes. That's a lot of work. It's not something that is a side job, I think. And I think a lot of people discover that as they try and do exactly that, right? Try and give somebody a little extra to do and hope that it gels somehow organically down the line.
Let's acknowledge that not every team can get the full budget approval that they would want right away for full DAM support.
Yeah.
If a team's in that position, if they can only afford, let's say, fractional support initially, what functions should they prioritize? What should come first?
Yeah, so if we're talking in terms of like real boots on the ground work, I frequently see people who might have a system or might have a process already and have some data. Frequently, just sitting down and assessing what do we have, doing an inventory is frequently the first best thing to just say, how big is the mess? Because you really can't get started with figuring out what it is you're going to have to accomplish without getting a better grip on the problem. So I would say first and foremost, figure out how much you want to do. Do you want to do the entire archive? Are you trying to go back in a 50-year company legacy? Or are you trying to get the last 6 months of stuff very, very available for your editors, right? Totally different projects. So figure out first what it is you need to do. And I would say before you start talking about those fractional library support pieces, figure out, those role allocations. You can talk about getting a governance board together before you bring in anybody for a librarian. Figure out who the responsible players are, get those pieces organized, figure out your mess. And then when you reach out to somebody to try and find that fractional support, they can say, you know what, now I know how to help you with your user journeys, or they'll say, I know exactly how to step in and say, okay, great. This looks like just a quality control thing where we got to clean this up because it got pushed through Excel 16 times and the formatting's all wrong. So it's just, we're going to require somebody to sit down and read it, and put it in another machine. Sometimes it's just that. Sometimes you look at it and go, okay, you know what? We can do 5 hours of tagging a week and that'll get us over the hump. Great. So it's really that matter of understanding the problem and saying, okay, where is the help needed? Is it tagging? Is it the governance? Is it archive? Is it a technological hurdle? Figuring out exactly where those points are in the team where you need somebody to be that extra pair of hands.
So budgetary constraints are always a factor.
Yeah.
And I get why teams, are maybe tempted to split the data management across their existing roles as it is. Maybe the senior editor takes on part of it and a producer maybe adds some of it to his or her plate as well. But that can create a lot of problems as well. You just went over some of them. What other challenges happen when teams try to run the dam as a side project as opposed to it being someone's primary responsibility? Are there issues with inconsistencies? What are the challenges that they face?
Yeah, I mean, so it'll start with the technology, right? People will get the technology in place and they simply won't know how to use it. And that's, I think, thing one. They'll sign on to a tool or to a new service and they'll suddenly have a lot of language thrown at them about, oh, well, it's a cloud infrastructure. Oh, well, it's got, they'll hear all these different pieces and parts and technology. That frequently is a flood of information that folks are not ready for. And so saying to someone, okay, well, you need to understand this entire suite of tech as a side job is not exactly a recipe for success. It's too much. And when you spread it around, you get that inconsistency of, if you think about it this way, if there hasn't been an organic, efficient path that has evolved out of people doing the work that they are very good at in individual spaces, as you've spread that work around, there won't be a tool that will magically make those individual people somehow do the same thing without there being some serious guidance, because they're just going to do their exact same stuff with a different tool. They're going to get their job done the way they know how, but it's going to be this side thing they got to do after they do their job. It's not organically placed in their space in a way that lets them work on their work. You're just giving them more work that doesn't resonate with them. So everybody winds up resenting the process and your user adoption goes into the basement because you don't have the right people doing the right work. And so the metadata is garbage in, garbage out. you can't find anything. And so everybody goes, well, then it becomes a finger pointing game of like, well, they didn't tag, or they used the wrong word, or they didn't deliver their stuff. And, it doesn't get at the root of the problem, which is always, it's that user journey stuff, right? It's sitting down and doing the user journey work, figuring out how everybody wants to work, and then getting close to that ideal using the tools you have at hand, and then adding in whatever you need to get that extra, 10% to get to the 100.
So throughout the conversation, you've kept coming back to user journeys and really understanding how teams talk about their work. Before we wrap up, I want to ask, what's the core message you really want creative leaders to take away about making a DAM actually work?
The thing I think I always want to lean into, and the thing I always want to make sure people think about, is that the process of the user journey, of understanding those moments of, where does it go and why does it go there, who is doing it, and doing those handoff conversations, really digging into the nitty gritty of how people talk about what they're working with, I think is a very important thing. Understanding the terminology of what somebody means when they say title, that's an easy one that may or may not have, like, for instance, it could be a, professional title versus the title of the asset, or the title of the film versus title being piped in for file name in some systems. Like, it can go all over the place. You have to figure out which one people are saying, and sitting down and having those conversations. They don't have to be super in depth, but just sit down and, pump through the bullet points of like, does everybody know what this means? And are we all using it the same way? Yes. Good. Move on. Does everybody know what this means? Are we always, yes. Great. Move on. You got to do that. I think it's just that, there are those elements of just sitting down, talking to your teams, figuring out what's being used for terms, and figuring out how you're getting stuff done. Those conversations are always vital. And there's never a tool that's going to make that happen without sitting down and just having that face-to-face with your team.
And I think even if not everyone is as excited about it as you are, it is important that they understand how important this is and how essential it is to improving not just their workflow, but their work life.
Yes.
And the efficiency. You referenced this before as well, about knowing if there was a shoot that has already taken place. So for instance, not having to recreate the reel or redo a shoot if you already have access to that footage is really essential.
Yeah, absolutely.
In large organizations that are very siloed, where you may have different creative groups who don't necessarily talk to each other, they may have different DAMs, for instance. What recommendations do you have for bridging the gap between those so that Team A and Team B, who have their own DAMs, they can talk to each other better, so they can understand what footage each one has, even if they can't get access to it as easily as they would if it was just a single unified DAM?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of ways to work with that. First of all, if you have multiple systems in a given institution and you're trying to figure out, well, should we or shouldn't we consolidate them? I think the first thing to say is look at who's using those systems and which teams are happy, right? Which teams are sitting with their asset management and going, this is clicking along. We don't touch our stuff. We're great. If they're cooking, leave them alone. If there's another team that's like, we hate what's going on, we can't do this, that's where you're sitting down and going, okay, is it the team needs to figure out a new process first, or is it literally that the tool is just the wrong tool? Because that can happen, right? I mean, they might be doing everything they can to get over the hump with this thing that they've got. And if it doesn't work and the other one's chugging along, if you can align those priorities, great. If you've got two systems that are working super well and you don't want to disrupt people, but you want to find a way to share that success, that's where you're going to move into things like API integrations and saying, okay, well, how do we make sure that we can expose the great work and the great resources on the side without disturbing the work that they're doing? And we can enhance both teams by pushing that stuff out there, saying, okay, well, is this something where we want to make sure that they just have access maybe to final assets so they can just watch a deliverable and go, ooh, do you have more of that footage? And then you get access to a shared folder or something like that. There's a lot of ways to slice that. Some systems, if you look at the asset management architectures that are out there now, you can create wholly separate portals and user groups that never have to see each other. They're totally siloed inside of a single piece of software. So it doesn't have to be a full merging of units if you're just looking to share content. And a lot of it is, again, that process of saying, why do we need these assets? Are these things that they are going to use consistently? Should it be a separate library they can browse if they need it? Should it be flowed with the system that they're already working with? Or is it, there's so many different steps to figuring out first, do they even use the same nomenclature, right? Are there totally different job numbers? Yeah. So, I mean, a final for one group might be the final edit of an audio file, or it might be the final of your color for mastering film or something like that, right? Whereas a final for another might be the edit for a 30-second commercial. Depends on what you're doing in-house. And so it's a whole different ballgame depending on what data means things to other people. It's that whole process of turning like data or information into knowledge. Like that's a big jump to say, here's an objective piece of information about something, and then contextualizing it for users so that it becomes knowledge is a big jump. And I think that architecture you set up is what creates that link in absence of a human being.
Very well said. All right, Phil, thank you so much for joining me and for explaining, like I said at the beginning, so much of what is an opaque, confusing, and frustrating aspect of so many creatives day to day.
Yeah.
I love how enthusiastic you are about it, and appreciate you sharing your enthusiasm and your knowledge with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, this was fun. Appreciate it, Jesse. Thank you.
Let's recap the key insights from today's conversation. First, buying a DAM platform is not the same as having an effective DAM system. The difference is governance. You need to rethink old habits, clarify responsibilities, and figure out who's actually going to manage this thing. As Phil said, the tool isn't the solution. The solution is a shift of habits and mindsets and often workload. Second, start your planning well before you look at platforms. Talk to your users. Understand what's working and what isn't. Map out those handoff points where things break down. That groundwork will save you time and money later. Third, be realistic about resourcing. DAM management is not a side job. If you try to split it across existing roles, you'll often end up with inconsistent metadata, frustrated team members, and a system that nobody trusts. Whether you're hiring internally or you use fractional support or you outsource completely, make sure that someone is actually responsible for governance. And finally, remember that at its core, DAM management is about communication. It's about understanding how your team talks about their work, what they mean when they use certain terms, and building systems that support those actual workflows instead of forcing people into rigid structures that don't really fit. If you're struggling with creative ops challenges with your own team, whether it's DAM management, stakeholder alignment, or project management bottlenecks, I'd like to offer you a free 30-minute creative ops assessment. We'll dig into your specific situation, and you'll walk away with a clear diagnosis of what's not working and actionable steps you can implement right away. There's no catch or pressure, just honest guidance. You can request an assessment at infocusconsulting.net. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe and leave a comment. Let me know what creative ops challenges you're facing. What topics would help your team work better? And if you work with in-house teams, whether you're an agency partner, a stakeholder, or a freelancer, I'd love to hear your perspective too. Reach out through the contact info in the show notes. Thanks for listening.